you so much for joining us here at The Research Her, the show working to improve the health disparities for women of color, one topic at a time. I am Alicia. I'm here learning and growing with you as we research our way to well-being. I am so excited to bring to you all my graces, now your graces, Dr. Kilan Ashad-Bishop, who is a biomedical scientist and advocate for inclusion. Her work lies at the intersection of science, health, and social change. She earned her Bachelor of Science in biology from Morgan State University and also earned a Ph.D. from the University of Miami in cancer biology. Dr. Kilan is currently a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Miami School of Education and Human Development and the director of college access for Breakthrough Miami. She is co-founder of STEM Noir, a research and wellness community for Black women in STEM. Her advocacy efforts are interdisciplinary as she serves as the vice chair of the City of Miami Climate Resilient Committee. Without further ado, let's get into this conversation with my great sis. Okay, we're gonna start off with Icebreaker Questions. Are you ready?
Yes. Put me in, coach.
Okay. If you had to eat the same thing every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, it's French fries. It's curly fries, waffle fries, crinkle cut fries. It's definitely fried potatoes.
Which texture or what should it be? What shape is your preference?
If they're cooked right, it's definitely waffle fries. Like, you can't beat that increase in surface area. Like, you can eat a fry in multiple bites. It's perfect. But the concept, as long as it is a nice chopped fried potato, we're in there.
Name one Black woman researcher who inspires you.
Beronda Montgomery, botanist and writer. I love the way she merges like her talents and her different worlds kind of seamlessly. So definitely her. Kudos.
Nice. What does an exciting day look like for you?
So I like being outside. Anything where I can like be outside in nature, preferably on the water, is an exciting, like, restorative day.
So let's get into it. Did small baby Kilan know that she wanted to be a biomedical scientist?
Yes. So I actually shared an excerpt from my statement of purpose a couple of days ago on social media. Baby Key was very sure that she wanted to be a scientist. It started with like love for the outdoors, just being that kid that was outside playing in the dirt, picking up snails. Mommy, I have a new pet. And, you know, giving her all kinds of heart attacks from being outside and loving outside. And it evolved over time because my grandfather was sick. And so I saw that he was going back and forth to the hospital. I saw that the doctors didn't really know what was wrong at first. And if you let my family tell it, I had all the questions. I was like, listen, I need answers. Like, here's my list. I definitely knew, just kind of by virtue of my lived experience and the things that I found interesting, that science was it. I didn't know that I wanted to be a biomedical scientist. I didn't know at the time that it was going to lead to a PhD. I didn't know that I would specialize in cancer, but the basics were there.
Mm-hmm. Why did you end up choosing biology when it was time for you to go to college at Morgan State? I mean, there are many options, but you were very specific in choosing biology and you stuck with it.
Definitely could have gone either way, because when I decided that I wanted to be a scientist, I said I wanted to make drugs. Like, I wanted to make pharmaceuticals. So I could have gone bio, I could have gone chemistry, I could have gone engineering. I had a teacher in high school. Her name escapes me, but I've never forgotten the day in her class. It was a bio class, that she popped a helium-filled balloon, and it basically combusts when helium meets oxygen. And I was like, oh, if this is what they do in bio, I'm in. Like, I already liked it. I already knew I liked the general concept. I know now that that wasn't exactly a biology experiment.
That was very much chemistry, and you are in the wrong, right. You went into the wrong field, but it's okay. We forgive you.
Yeah, it was, like I said, it could have gone either way, but because she was my bio teacher, because I knew biology as like the study of like life, and that was the way that it had been marketed to me, it just kind of appealed to me. And I knew that it was a good point to start, even if my interests like would evolve, like that was where I wanted to start out.
At what point did you decide you wanted to pursue a PhD?
So that wasn't so straightforward. So I attended Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland for college. I decided, as we just discussed, to major in biology. And I wanted to do research. I saw that there were these labs around, so I applied for a program. I started in an NSF program called HBCU Up, just, undergrads getting research experience. That was the first of a few different research experiences. And between the fact that I was doing those and I liked working in the lab, and everyone that I worked for had a PhD, and the fact that my family, my mother has a doctorate in education. Many of my adoptive aunties have doctorates of education and other things. I guess I had always thought that there would be some kind of school past undergrad, past the bachelor's degree. And so it was a combination of like, okay, they keep telling me that there's something next. And like, these are the people that are running the labs where I like working. So yeah, like, let's do that. That seems like a solid plan.
When did you decide I'm going to start applying for a PhD specifically in this field of biomedical science?
I was in another program called the Marquis Star program. That's an NIH program that has a similar focus, undergraduate research experiences, but that one is geared towards pursuing a PhD. Being a bio major, I was around a lot of people who wanted to go to medical school. I knew that I didn't want to go to medical school. I had interacted with medical doctors at that point, and they were doing the work on a different level than where I wanted to be. By that, I mean, if we're still in that, I want to make drugs, good kind of drugs. They are prescribing the drugs. I wanted to be behind the scenes, actually producing the research and moving the field forward so that their work could be moved forward. That in particular was a conversation that I had with my program director at the time, where it was like, yeah, what you are saying that you want to do in that field, which is like biomedical science, pharmacology, it is highly advised that you get a PhD at some point if you want to run a research group, because you can work with a bachelor's degree, you can work with a master's degree. But in order to be in charge, which is something that I was very, very much interested in, that was the barrier to entry. It wasn't like I went into the PhD, the graduate school applications process, like, ooh, I can't wait till they call me Dr. Bishop. That was an unintended side effect. It was like, literally for me, this is the barrier that you have to make it past to be able to do what you want to do the way that you want to do it. So I kind of fell into it, if you will. Like, that was just the path.
So my understanding is you started your bachelor's degree pretty young. How old were you?
I was 16. I left home to go to college at 16.
Yeah, so you went away. And how was it literally being a child while you were in college?
You summed it up perfectly. I was just a kid. I was bumping my head. I was learning lessons. I had a family that was very, very supportive. That is very, very supportive. But when I was at home, don't tell my mom, when I was at home, they really, really sheltered me. They really wanted me to focus on my scholarly activities. I wasn't necessarily the kid that you would find at all of the events or running around the city. I was quiet. I was on my couch. I was reading books. And so when I left home and got that kind of first taste of freedom, I learned a lot of lessons very, very quickly. I'll put it that way. One of those was what to wear in the snow. That was one version of that kind of lesson, because the first day it snowed in Baltimore, I definitely had on flip-flops. Being more responsible and going like, nobody is going to present me with snow pants the way that my mom did when I was a kid when we were going to the snow. I have to go get these things. It was kind of a shock, not in the way I was at an HBCU, so not like a culture shock necessarily, but it was an independence shock where all of a sudden waking up and going to class, taking part in activities if I wanted to, going to different events, buying the things that I needed, it was all up to me. it would have been a lot different if I had really been 100% on my own. And I should say that I wasn't, because I was being financially supported even past the money that I was making doing research by my family. So it wasn't like I was completely just a child in the world with no support outside of myself. That definitely was not my story.
Yeah. So if you had to pick one thing that you would change about your academic pursuits, what would it be?
I had a constant struggle during my studies with people in advisory roles taking issue with anything that I did past the lab, taking issue with anything that I did past research. And it was that thing of like, I always knew that I wanted to be a scientist, but I also went into it to help people. If I can't help people in the work that I'm doing in the lab, because I'm an undergrad, right? Most of what I'm doing is dishes. Like, I'm not making groundbreaking discoveries at 17 at Morgan State in Baltimore. The way that I can help people is service outside of that. Those two things were equally important to me. And I just feel like there were many stages in my training where I found myself justifying that to people who didn't understand. What I would have changed about my trajectory or my studies is at some point, I think I would have taken up a minor or like formalized that interest in some way so that it was a part of my academic pursuits instead of being purely reduced to something that was an extracurricular, unnecessary activity. So, for example, I was in student government in undergrad. Maybe my minor would have been political science so that I could justify in a way that was more palatable to my supervisors.
Along that line, what were some of your biggest challenges or one of your biggest challenges that you faced while in academia?
So it was that. It was wanting to be a scientist of the world when the current training system is only really worried about making scientists of the academy. That manifested in a few different ways. In undergrad, the research that I was doing and the programs that I was a part of were a large part of my undergraduate career, but they weren't the entire thing. At the end of the day, you know, I'm being supported by this program, but they didn't own me in the way that I was really like beholden, and you know, the struggle, beholden to my graduate supervisor during my graduate studies. I remember when I went to graduate school, I came down to Miami, Florida to attend the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. I remember that the supervisor that I ended up with took issue with literally anything that I did that wasn't the lab. The things that she saw were me going to the gym, taking a lunch break during an incubation and going and working out and coming back. She would have had a whole fit if she knew the extent of my extracurricular activities and the extent of the work that I did. There were so many times that the challenge was I felt like there was not room made for all of me in my studies or all of the ways that I needed to develop to be what I was saying that I wanted to be. It was instead them trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and fit all that I was in what their perception of a scientist was. And that wasn't enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any recommendations or advice for people who may be struggling and having a challenging relationship with their PIs? Do you think they should be getting recommendations for them? Because in a lot of cases, you know, some of these applications may say one of the people have to be your principal investigator. So what do you do then?
Right. So I kept it light for the previous question, but before I answer your question, I think it's important for me to say my graduate advisor and I do not speak to this day. Our relationship was very tumultuous. And in graduate school, especially, the person that you decide to work for, the person who you train under, really is supposed to be someone that you are attached to for the rest of your life. Like, you know, I have a PhD in cancer biology. Oh, great. Who did you train under? And I'm supposed to say this person's name. To your point, I think the only reason that her absence in my life right now does not affect me or my career the way that it should is because I went above and beyond while I was in graduate school under her supervision to demonstrate that I was competent in ways that she could never testify to because she did not know me and did not care to know me. To your point about recommendation letters, I did not ask her for any letters. I don't to this day. To your point about the recommendations that applications have, those are exactly that, recommendations. Those are suggestions, letters of recommendation, letters of support, shameless plugs should only come from people, in my opinion, that believe in you. And if you happen to be matched with somebody who financially supports your presence in their lab, but that's about it, that's not the person. So work on building relationships outside of that person. And beyond that, never let your worth be tied up in what one person thinks of you. You know, like never let your reputation be limited to what that person is willing or not willing to say. That was a large part of why I started working outside of the lab, but it's also a large part of why I suggest that all graduate students during their 4, 5, 6, 8 years of study, especially in STEM, do something besides the lab, develop other skills. They try to tell you, like, you know, do the lab first and things come later. It looks real crazy to say that you spent 7 years doing one thing and only that one thing. Like, why would you do that to yourself?
Mm-hmm. Because honestly, societal, or I shouldn't say societal, because very much academia is its own little society.
Yes.
Okay, so then yes, academic society norms. Yes. But that's why you look at what everyone else around you is doing and you do that versus doing what's true to your heart and what you believe are things that you're passionate about that keep you from being drained, keep you from losing all your energy. I mean, it's a very common practice in conversations like these, and just being more present with your mentees allows others to feel more inclined to exist outside of the lab. But it is very much normal to feel that way, but it shouldn't be the norm.
It definitely shouldn't be. And, you know, think about it like a competitive edge. The reason that I stood out when I finished up my graduate studies was because I was, yes, a graduate student. I was also an appointed board member on the City of Miami Sea Level Rise Committee. I had also taken part in a few leadership development programs. I was also, you know, first runner-up in the 3-minute thesis science communication competition. So,
Come
like,
on, sis.
what?
Come on.
I'm just, it's like, this is not a chance to total resume or a CV, but what are you past your academic accomplishments or your academic endeavors? Yeah. A lot of people don't have the answer to that. And it's really unfortunate because you are so much more than your work or your science.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice throughout your pursuits professionally that you were and are a Black woman in certain rooms?
You know, yes. I'm going to flip that question and say that even if I wanted to forget, the people around wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me because when I walked into certain meetings, the first thing that was said was, "Oh, did you change your hair? Those braids are so nice." One time I had to field a question about whether the synthetic hair in my twist was a risk to sensitive RNA samples. Wild. They wouldn't let me because my body type was different. So one time I was told I shouldn't wear my workout tights because it might be distracting to males who were around. There was no way that I could have played pretend that I was anything but a Black woman. One of the first times that I hung out with my cohort, there were 44 people that came in my year at the University of Miami. There were 4 Black people, 3 Black women. I'm going to say that one more time. There were 3 Black women. And it wasn't like we had spring admissions and fall admissions. No, this was it. This was us. One of my cohort members, love him to death. He really was a sweetheart. He said, "Kilan, I can tell you this now. Every time you sat in the back of the class and you changed your hair, I thought you were a new person." I was like,
where these Black women at that you think exist on this in this program?
I wish there were that many Black women. Like, once a month, a hair change, that makes 12. I wish there were 12 Black women in this cohort, but that's just not the case. So, like, that's actually not a funny story. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thought. It's funny to me now. Like, we can laugh about it. But in the moment, I just remember being like, this is why I don't come out. Like, between the fact that the refreshments are always beer and I don't drink beer, and the fact that things like this are little idle conversations, no wonder I'd be in the house with my Black woman roommate,
Yes. You spoke on challenges that you faced with your advisor. Did that translate into challenges with publishing?
My graduate program has a one first author publication requirement. In order to graduate from the program, the standard is one first author publication. And that's low, because I know other programs where it needs to be like 2 or 3 first author publications. And if that was the case, Dr. Franklin, I would still be in graduate school. I would still be chugging along as a Ph.D. as they call it on the interweb. When it was time to publish my work, I was doing both together. I was writing my dissertation and also writing the data that we wanted to publish in that moment. I was really excited to kind of put everything into one higher impact paper. But my advisor was like, no, let's split it into 2. So we published the first half of my work. And I was happy about that, right? It was my first scientific publication. It was the fruit of my labor. Now I'm in an entirely different field, but I got an email a couple months ago saying that the second half of my cancer work was ready to be published. I'm reading the email. And I was like, oh, wait, this is not an email asking for comments on the manuscript. This is a receipt of submission. The second half of my thesis work was published without a chance for me to even
look at it, smell it.
My goodness. I couldn't even let her know that I wanted my middle initial to be included in future publications, because the first time she definitely excluded it. And my middle name means a lot to me. It's my whole name. It'll spell out everything. So it was very much something that I intended to say. And that opportunity just passed me by. And I remember being so upset, because that's not the way that it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have an opportunity to comment on a manuscript. If you are listed as an author, you're supposed to have an opportunity to, look at the data, if it's your data. But so much of my graduate training was not what it was supposed to be. Like, why would I expect this to be any different?
Right.
You just have to roll with the punches. At the end of the day, I know that it's good work. It's good research. I know the effort that I put in for those mouse experiments, those 16-hour days. And I'm glad that it's going to be eventually, right, out in the world for other people to learn from and to build from. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes. But, like I said, everything has just been more challenging because of the tumult that was my graduate training.
You got your PhD in cancer biology.
Yes, ma'am.
And now you are working on your postdoc at the University of Miami School of Education and Human Development. How did you end up choosing a postdoc that was outside of what your PhD work was?
I was, no joke, in shambles after my PhD. In the last month, I was like barely holding it together. I cried my whole graduation weekend. I felt so relieved, but I wasn't at the point where I could pursue a PhD in another discipline of biomedical science or continue in cancer biology. I knew the risks that I would be taking because I knew that world. And I just didn't have the patience for another subpar lab experience. I literally couldn't do it. I needed to go into a space where I could do some healing. And work
and heal. Hard to do at the same time, but
It is. It is. It wasn't, when I say healing, right? Sometimes the way that wellness is commodified, you would think I took a 3-month retreat to Bali and was up in the mountains somewhere. No, I needed to work, but I also needed a healthier space. I took a fellowship with the National Academy of Sciences, the Christine Mirzayan Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And during that time, I worked with the Board on Higher Education and Workforce. Literally, my statement for that said, listen, I don't know what this graduate experience was, but I know it doesn't have to be like this. And y'all do the work that shows that it doesn't have to be like this. So I want to contribute to this. I want to learn about the system that I've been existing in instead of just, continuing to roll along in that system. So I was passionate about it. It was a space where I could learn the language behind my experiences and behind the experiences of so many others. And my mentor, let me tell you about an angel. I worked under Tom Rudin, who directs both the Board on Higher Education and Workforce and also the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And they had published reports on reforming graduate education, graduate STEM education. They had published reports on sexual harassment of women in science, engineering, and medicine. They were working on a report on effective mentorship in STEM. Oh, and they had a report on the role of minority serving institutions to broaden participation in STEM and bolster the STEM workforce. Listen, doesn't this all sound like the move? Mm-hmm. It was the move. I'm just trying to tell you, I was so ready. And the fellowship is short. The Mirzayan fellowship is only 12 weeks. But I was so passionate, and Tom was so good at channeling that passion into work that aligns with where I needed to be and the things that I needed to learn, that during that 12 weeks, I did everything from sitting in on consensus study meetings to actually going to dissemination events and coordinating those events. So I was doing everything from, logistics help to actually hosting. It was just amazing. And like I said, I was learning the language and I was learning the system instead of just existing in the system and pushing back when I had the energy. That was transformative. It transformed the way that I thought about academia. And it also let me know that whether or not it had been my experience, there was a body of people who are committed to the eventual reform of graduate STEM education so that no one suffers the way that I did, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How I made it back to academia, to the conversation that we were having about med school versus a PhD. The people who were doing that work were PhDs. They were researchers. The academy doesn't do primary research, but they bring in that talent. I wanted to be the person that they were going to bring in. I wanted to move that work forward. Those are the academicians. Those were the researchers. So I said, okay, well, now I want to do a postdoc, but I don't want to do a postdoc in STEM. I want to do a postdoc that would allow me to do this kind of work. That's in ed, that's in social sciences. Didn't really have the range to get there. I took a job consulting until an opportunity presented itself with an organization that wanted to work with the University of Miami, that was working. They wanted to expand their partnership, and they wanted someone who could navigate the bureaucracy of the institution, but also move the nonprofit side of the program forward. Because of all of the extracurricular work that I had been involved in, I was a good candidate, and they were interested in me. Did I have education publications? Did I have experience in qualitative research? Any of these things? No. But they trusted, because of the work ethic that I had demonstrated, that whatever I didn't know, I would figure it out.
And that's so inspirational, personally. The research that you do in your PhD is very much something that you feel tied to, and you feel like it is going to be what you do with your career.
The rest of your life, yes.
Because you spend so much time, and it becomes all you know for those years as far as knowledge goes. You dive into this very specific research, and you just feel like, okay, well, now that I've dug myself into this hole of understanding, and I know so much about this thing, how can I climb up out of this place and figure out what is it I truly want to do with the rest of my life? I'm currently postdocing and I'm doing something that is just an extension of what I did for my Ph.D., but it's truly not my passion. Hearing you speak just inspires me because it's like, well, actually, sis, you don't have to stay here. You can go on and get a postdoc and people can trust that you will learn what you need to learn. It's just a matter of finding someone who believes in you. And it seems like that's what you found.
Yes, and that's the goal of a postdoc, right? The goal of a postdoc is that you become more independent. The goal of a postdoc is that you do whatever you need to do to get the work done. Whereas as a grad student might be like a little bit more waiting for direction or needing permission or consent for certain things.
Yeah.
It really is about like, to what extent are you willing to go to develop the skill set, to make the progress, to make the connections, to mediate the collaborations that are going to move the work that you want to do forward. Mm-hmm. And to what extent can you convince people that you are the person to do all of those things?
Yeah. So do you feel more attached to your current research than you did to your past work?
I do. And I noticed this along the way. When people ask me about my graduate work, I'm like, yeah, I worked on a Wnt transcription cofactor and the role that it played in the etiology and progression of triple negative breast cancer. And the excitement really comes from them. Oh, wow, cancer biology? That's amazing. Thank you so much for your service. I used to be like, huh?
I mean, I go to lab.
Right. Like this is just what I do. And that's not to say that I will never go back to cancer biology, because I do like cancer as a field. It's just that the particulars and how deep I was in those basic mechanisms didn't really do anything for me. Yeah. Now, when I talk about the work that I do now, I'm like, let me tell you about how we're doing a mixed method study to determine how community-based organizations are helping families navigate the challenges presented by COVID-19. Educational disparities, the health-related ones. Let me tell you about this proposal I just wrote on the relation between the community well-being and housing stability, and how that's being affected by eviction moratoriums in the face of COVID-19. Yes, a lot of my work right now focuses on COVID-19. It's a different kind of feeling, and it's a different kind of sense of purpose where I'm like, this is about people. Before it was about proteins. Now it's about people, and that is something that I never want to let go of. Yes. Even if I get the perfect position for me, which will be a blend of the two, it needs to be both, not one or another.
Mm-hmm. I feel that so much. I feel like you're just taking thoughts out of my brain and communicating them so well for me. Thank you, sis.
Oh, I try. That's what's dope about your podcast, right? It's like every episode that I've listened to, even if the researcher is like completely out of field for me, I found something that they said that's been like relatable. And so thank you for, the work that you're doing and for being so diligent and starting this during graduate school, which I can't even imagine because I was in distress.
As was I, which is why we as a community needed to take a break somewhere towards the end of that. But we going to talk about that after, okay? So some of your work that you're doing now is more focused on science education. And with that, you are still a part of the larger scientific community. I wonder, do you feel, as someone who's coming from working as a life scientist, do you feel undervalued by the larger science community?
One thing that I definitely realized in my switch is that the science folks, like the hard quote unquote science folks, we are a shady bunch, okay? We are really a shady bunch. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I remember snickers and conversations that I used to have with folks in undergrad and grad school about people who would do research projects and it would take them 3 months and they had a publication, and being like, like, what is that? I remember my friends doing a master's and a PhD and being done before me. And I'm like, what? Like, how? There is a really strong divide between the social sciences and the more technical sciences. And we need to let that go. We need to hold hands. We need to sing Kumbaya. This is why. We talked about challenges. We talked about, being a Black woman in STEM. And there are so many other conversations and things that we experience, but don't have the language for. Guess who has the language for it? Those same folks we shade when they leave the room. It's the thing where just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you should discount it. And just because somebody decides to broaden their research portfolio and, maybe do a switch, it doesn't discount from the fact that at one point they were having the exact same experience as you. They just chose a different path in light of that. So we definitely need to be more gracious toward each other and do more collaborations. Personally, what I would love to see is a class in graduate school about the demographics of STEM and about the reason that the demographics are the way that they are, and a conversation about what each of us could do, kind of analytical course where there's not really exams, but you're instead having like an open conversation. And it's like, what could you personally do to change this? And then what kind of institutional change could you advocate for that might make one of your peers more comfortable and more likely to finish? I remember in graduate school thinking about the fact that our stipend was so low. And I used to complain. I was like, we make pennies. Ugh. It wasn't until I realized that international students were making even less because they had some funny like taxes that they had to pay, that I was like, does that discount the fact that like my lifestyle cannot be maintained by this graduate stipend? No, but it contextualized things in a different way. And that's what social sciences grants us the opportunity to do, to contextualize and understand phenomena instead of just living them, and maybe taking them as something that's happening to us as individuals instead of something that's happening to a larger collective population.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about the research that you do now?
Yeah, so 3 months into this education postdoc, my mentor, Black woman, I have to say, Dean of the School of Education, not first Black woman dean, but only Black woman dean across the entire university. Right.
Child.
So we were having a conversation about an internal request for proposals that came up. And it was, we want interdisciplinary teams to investigate things surrounding COVID-19. She was like, this is a good opportunity for you to bring both of your worlds together. You can write a grant as a UM employee to study what Breakthrough is doing right now. And Breakthrough is the nonprofit side of my job, where I run the high school program. I was like, you know what? I can try and put a proposal together. Not really sure what I'm doing here, but like I can try and put the words that we have just exchanged onto paper. So got that together. It was a quick turnaround because it was a short proposal. When she opened it, she was like, oh, wait, you might be amazing. I was like, wait, really?
Me, not me.
We had known each other when I was in graduate school, but we really hadn't like worked together in any meaningful way. All she knew was that this cancer biology Ph.D. just kind of got plopped in her lap. This was our first time to kind of see my work. And she was like, okay, yes, we're going to submit this. And also, we need to talk about your future. I was like, oh, we can do that. That proposal was to study the role of community-based organizations in mitigating disparities that have been exacerbated by COVID-19. My job at Breakthrough got more complicated once Miami-Dade County Public Schools closed in March and went remote because all of a sudden we were presented with having to do virtual programming when we had only ever done in person. And 2, all of a sudden people's basic needs were not being met the same way that they had before. So we couldn't just say, hey, we're here to do academic enrichment. We also had to say, are you okay? How's your housing stability? Are you still employed? To our parents and then to our scholars, do you have what you need to be successful in online school, or are you just like lost and confused? The study really seeks to understand the role that CBOs played in the ways which we were most helpful. The goal overall was to inform the stakeholders that allow us to do our work, like funders, because the nonprofit sector doesn't exist in a silo. Like I said, it's completely out of field. It's a combination of mobile technology that allows us to basically just send a survey via text message to people's phones, and they can complete it real quick, takes no more than like 5 minutes tops. And a qualitative portion where we did interviews to understand some of the data that we had collected on a deeper level. It's funny because I'm the postdoc and I wrote the grant proposal, so you think I'm like out here doing all the research. I'm a part of the research team, but my role is deeper now that I'm no longer a grad student. I'm handling like compensation for some of our study participants. I'm managing grant funds. It's this other side of things that people say exists, but you don't really get to see unless your graduate mentor is very transparent. Maybe a couple months after that, a colleague of mine at Mizzou was like, hey, we're going to submit a proposal for a STEM ed study to NSF. We want to study the role of Blackness in undergraduate biology education, the intersections, the lack thereof. I was like, that sounds dope. Yes, I want to be part. So I'm on the steering committee for that, which has been fascinating because the literature is just like so different on that side. Between those two projects is so different. So I feel like it's just been like a rapid, really drastic expansion of my base of knowledge and of the work. And this is just to show like how I'm using this postdoc, because postdocs are supposed to be about expansion of skill. Postdocs are supposed to be where you learn some new things. It's just, what are we, 8 months, almost 9, but 8 months into 2020. And I have just learned so much. I feel so grateful to have come into this mishmash of a role where I'm a postdoc at UM and an employee at a nonprofit. Even though some days I get overwhelmed, and I'm definitely working on not overextending myself, the amount that I have learned, I just know that it wouldn't have been the case if I did a traditional postdoc in my field. A traditional postdoc in my field could never, just to be honest.
I understand. Is there any preliminary data that you can share with us with regards to what you've learned so far in your research?
It's weird as well, switching fields, because like what we define as data is like so different. Like what we are confident stating over in biomedical science is different than people's experience, which you're not going to go back to them and be like, are you sure? Are you sure that's what you experienced? Because I know you said this a month ago, but I just want to come back and make sure. And so, based on what we have, the data we've seen thus far, it's really just a confirmation that the needs of students and their families ballooned during that time. And some of those needs were definitely served by the school district. But a lot of those needs and a lot of support was also from community-based organizations like Breakthrough and others that we didn't have them name, but, we asked, did you get support from another CBO that wasn't Breakthrough? And the answer was yes. And so as much as we have to make sure that schools are ready to pivot in times of crisis, it also seems like we need to have a solid plan to commit the same level of support almost to community-based organizations that concern themselves with education and, supporting those basic needs.
How is your research currently impacting others?
What's interesting about the social sciences is it's not always like I have this random crazy idea. I don't know how this mechanism works, and so I'm going to posit that this is how it works. Mm-hmm. Instead, the work now feels more like giving voice to the experiences of people. It's not as if I can say, by virtue of my work, mm-hmm. people are not being kicked out of their homes. Like, I wouldn't say anything that far-fetched, but I will say that we are capturing narratives mm-hmm. that we can carefully share to make sure that experiences, diverse experiences, complicated experiences,
yes,
that there's a record of those
mm-hmm. are accounted for. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that those narratives are present and accounted for. And everything that I'm learning now, all of the, literature that I'm reading, all of the books, I always am thinking about how I can translate this to, like I said earlier, the STEM ed work that I want to do. If I wanted to, for example, capture experiences of Black women who had negative mentoring experiences during graduate study, I'm always thinking about what would be the proper methodology to answer those kind of questions.
Right.
And what needs to come through, and in what ways do those narratives, once shared, need to be analyzed to bring out proper themes that might move folks to more actively advocate for change. And maybe it's an ego thing, but I don't think so. Like, it definitely just feels more impactful in that immediate way versus the work in the lab that just sometimes is so far from being applicable that it's off-putting. Not everybody can be translational. Of course, basic biomedical science is very, very important, but sometimes that bigger picture that you have to paint just feels like such a reach, and this no longer feels like a reach.
Yeah. And in what ways are you learning to do your new way of research? And how do you keep yourself from feeling like an imposter in this new field?
So first of all, I know that this is not what I'm supposed to say, but I am owning my imposter status. I literally am sitting up like, I know that there are some things that I should know that I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. I don't think that I don't belong in this space, but I do realize that I am an anomaly in this space. Like I said, I just own it, and that's the way it's going to be for a little bit. I'm reading. I'm doing a lot of reading, getting familiar. It's almost like being back in grad school in those first couple years where you're just like printing reams and reams of papers, thinking that those papers are going to make things make sense.
Yeah.
It's just like that. Just making sure that theories and methods and things like that are common practice, that I'm familiar with them. The thing that has been, I think, most helpful for me is that I don't claim to have a whole lot of mentors in the STEM space for a variety of reasons, but I do have a lot of mentors in the education space. I have like about 4 that I can like really just call with dumb questions, schedule a time on their calendar and be like, I'm stressed. They'll be like, welcome to the club. Let's talk about it. Or I have this great idea, or I think is a great idea. Like, can you confirm or deny that this is a great idea? And so that's been really, really helpful too. One of the people who I consider a mentor is the principal investigator on that STEM education project that I'm on. He thought of me because I have an undergraduate bio experience, and he knew that I was trying to come into this space and that it would benefit me. So mentors, sponsors are really proving helpful, which is what people say, you know, but you really have to experience it. To experience the way it makes your life and your path just like a little bit easier, clears the brush a little bit.
So you and your co-founder, Teresa Alexander, have created Space for Black Women. Can you speak a little bit more about how STEM Noir came about?
Yes. So Teresa and I are very different, but also very similar. She is a native of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm a native of, as far as I know, the United States, California, you know, at least in the present generation. We have different experiences, but our worlds collided at Morgan State University, where we met in our respective research programs. When I was done with graduate school, and Teresa is still in graduate school, we have had plenty of conversations about what Black womanhood means in these contexts. And one thing that was similar just in both of our experiences was that it's hard to find support structures that are specifically geared toward Black women. And then for Teresa, you have to add the layer of being an immigrant when she was in the United States. So she, you know, I'm a double bind, she's a triple bind. And so she's back in Trinidad at the University of the West Indies. And at the time we started STEM Noir, I was working as a consultant. STEM Noir is a research and wellness community for Black women in STEM that we very much created to be a space for work and healing, like you said earlier, for work and healing, for research and Black women collective well-being, which is something that we had not found. So it was about creating a space that we wished we had. One thing that I know is a long-term vision for STEM Noir is like we often, Black women get called into conversations about change and racial justice and equity at their institutions. the way in which those conversations are spun, it becomes about what you can do for you. What can be done to make your experience more positive? But it's rarely about the collective. What can be done to make the experience of an unknown Black woman who won't be here for 4 to 5 years positive? And so a long-term vision of mine is for this to be a space where we convene, strategize, and then advocate for collective change. And we do that with the understanding that our healing can't be dependent on that change, but that shouldn't stop us from advocating until we get there.
Yeah. So what do you do for your well-being?
I eat French fries. No. I would look a lot different if all I did was eat French fries. I do eat
Absolutely.
a lot of fries.
We can look at the obliques and tell that is not all that you do, sis.
One thing that I really started doing in the tail end of graduate school, I had always worked out a little bit, but I started kicking it up. I was at the gym almost every day. And I should say a gym because I started on ClassPass. I don't know if you've heard of that app, but it allows you to skip around to different boutique gyms with your credits. So you don't have to have a membership at one place, but you can switch it up, keep it spicy. So working out is definitely one, in addition to my French fries. We eat, we work it off, balance. Another is making sure that I just take time, especially in the mornings when I'm high energy, to stop and inventory how I am feeling so that I can know it's a day that I need to be a little bit more careful about the people that I interact with or the things that I take up. Mindfulness, meditation have been really important. They're really important practices still in my life, in making sure that I'm just being cognizant of my needs at any given moment. And, another thing is I am, well, not now because Corona came through, but I'm definitely a social person. I'm an extrovert. I get energy from being around people. And so, hanging out with friends. A lot of my friends are non-scientists, but I do have scientist friends as well. So, just hanging out with people for whom science and research is not in their purview so that I'm forced to talk about things and think about things that are not relevant to my professional advancement, if you will. Nature, I like being outside. Paddleboarding is a fave of mine. So I try and make space for that when I can. But Miami's Bay is literally in crisis right now. So I was going to go paddleboarding this week and said, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to run into dead fish or algae or anything like that. So let me wait. Do it another week.
How can we connect with you after this episode?
KilanBishop.com is where you can find me. Kilan Bishop on all social media. I am super responsive, super open. I am not a huge internet person like our good sis, Dr. Franklin here. Mm-hmm. And so I keep my channels a little bit more quiet. I'm definitely around. And also, of course, follow STEM Noir. That's STEM, Noire, on all platforms as well, especially if you are a Black woman in STEM.
She would definitely be a great resource to you, so don't hesitate to reach out. If you want to connect with me, I am at The Research Her on the socials and also at theresearchher.com. If you could please leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, I would really, really appreciate that. So until next time, I holla.